I once believed marriage was about sacrifice. 5 years I spent trying to make Shannon happy, working overtime, cooking meals she barely touched, planning dates she called boring. I thought that was love. Then came that dinner party where I overheard her laughing with friends in our kitchen. My heart froze hearing her say those words. He cannot please anyone. 5 years of devotion reduced to a punchline. That night changed everything. I decided to stop trying to please her. And what happened next shocked us both. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. If this resonates with you already, hit that like button and subscribe to join our community of real stories. Trust me, you will want to hear how I reclaimed my dignity and what happened to our marriage. I grew up in a middle-class neighborhood in Minneapolis, where my parents taught me the value of hard work and generosity. Dad worked at the same manufacturing company for 30 years while Mom taught elementary school. They modeled a relationship based on mutual respect and support. I carried those values into adulthood, perhaps too earnestly. Shannon entered my life at my college buddy Thomas's 30th birthday celebration. She stood across the crowded rooftop bar, her laughter carrying over the music. There was something magnetic about her confidence. When Thomas introduced us, the connection was immediate. She worked in pharmaceutical sales, traveled frequently, and possessed a quick wit that kept me on my toes. Our first date stretched from coffee into dinner, and then drinks. By the end of the night, I felt like I had known her for years. Within 3 months, we were practically living together. Looking back, I recognize how quickly I fell into my natural role as a giver. When Shannon mentioned loving a specific author, I tracked down signed first editions. When she had a stressful day, I prepared her favorite meals. She seemed to appreciate my efforts, initially responding with affection and gratitude. 6 months into our relationship, I noticed small things. Shannon would often remark that restaurants I chose were good but not great. Gifts I gave her would be exchanged without mention. These moments stung briefly but seemed insignificant against the backdrop of our happiness. After a year together, I proposed during a weekend getaway to Lake Superior. The wedding planning revealed more about our dynamic. Shannon pushed for an expensive venue that stretched my savings while dismissing my suggestions as plain or uninspired. I rationalized her behavior as wedding stress and focused on her happiness. Our wedding day was beautiful despite the tension leading up to it. Shannon looked radiant, and the joy on her face as we exchanged vows convinced me that all the compromises were worthwhile. Her friends embraced me that day, telling me how lucky Shannon was to find such a thoughtful man. We moved into a modest home in the suburbs, and I took on additional projects at my engineering firm to afford the renovations Shannon wanted. The granite countertops, hardwood flooring, and designer furniture were well beyond our initial budget, but I wanted to create her dream home. My weekends disappeared into home improvement projects while Shannon brunched with her friends, often returning with new ideas for changes to our already stretched finances. Looking back, I see how Shannon began surrounding herself with friends who reinforced her critical nature. Jessica, her maid of honor, had been divorced twice and often made disparaging comments about men being disappointments. Mark and Laura, a couple we frequently socialized with, had a relationship where Laura clearly controlled every decision, while Mark silently acquiesced. Despite growing concerns, I remained hopeful. I believed that if I could just be attentive enough, generous enough, and loving enough, Shannon would fully reciprocate. When I planned our first anniversary trip to Napa Valley, she seemed genuinely touched. For a brief moment, our relationship felt balanced again. I held on to that feeling, not realizing how rare it would become. That first year of marriage established patterns that would intensify over time. I continuously adjusted my behavior to please Shannon, while she gradually raised her expectations. I told myself this was normal, that marriages required sacrifice, and that her happiness was a reflection of my worth as a husband. In reality, I was losing myself piece by piece in an exhausting effort to earn love that should have been freely given. The second year of our marriage marked a noticeable shift in how Shannon treated me. What began as occasional criticism evolved into a daily occurrence. No matter how I tried to anticipate her needs, I always fell short in her eyes. I remember spending an entire Sunday preparing a special anniversary dinner. I researched recipes, selected wines that complemented each course, and even bought new dinnerware to create the perfect setting. When Shannon came home, she glanced at my efforts and immediately pointed out that I had used the wrong herbs in the main course. She ate silently, then mentioned that her colleague Andrew would have paired a different wine. The evening I had spent days planning ended with her scrolling through social media on the couch while I cleaned the kitchen alone. Gift-giving became an exercise in futility. For her birthday, I purchased a necklace she had admired in a boutique window. When she opened it, her first response was to ask if I had kept the receipt. The necklace was exchanged the next day for something twice the price, with Shannon explaining that her colleagues would notice if she wore something average. Each rejection chipped away at my confidence. Date nights followed the same pattern. If I suggested a new restaurant downtown, Shannon would counter that her friend Rachel said it was overrated. If I planned an outdoor adventure, the weather was too unpredictable. Movie choices were too mainstream. Concerts featured bands past their prime, and weekend trips were to destinations that her social circle had moved beyond. As my work responsibilities increased, I still managed to handle most household chores. I did the grocery shopping, cooking, and cleaning, not because Shannon was too busy, but because nothing met her standards unless I did it precisely to her specifications. She would inspect the kitchen after I cleaned, pointing out spots I had missed or rearranging items in the refrigerator I had just organized. Family gatherings became battlegrounds. Shannon would smile sweetly at my parents while holding my hand, then later criticize everything from my mother's cooking to my father's stories. In contrast, I was expected to bond with her family and friends regardless of how they treated me. Her father never bothered to remember details about my career, despite my patient explanations each time we met. Her mother would make comments about Shannon marrying down disguised as jokes that no one found funny except Shannon. At social events with her friends, I became increasingly invisible. Shannon would interrupt my conversations to correct details or dismiss my opinions entirely. I watched her transform around them, laughing more loudly, touching her hair frequently and throwing glances my way to ensure I was not embarrassing her. Her friends began treating me with the same casual disregard, asking me to take group photos, but never including me in them. The worst part was how Shannon would diminish my achievements. When I received a promotion at work, she focused on how my colleague Thomas had advanced faster in his company. When I completed a half marathon after months of training, she wondered aloud why I had not aimed for the full distance like her friend Jason. Each accomplishment became another opportunity to highlight my shortcomings. Our arguments intensified as I finally began expressing my frustration. Shannon mastered the art of turning every disagreement back on me. If I mentioned feeling unappreciated, she would counter that I was too needy. If I asked for more respect, she would claim I was too sensitive. Each confrontation ended with me apologizing, even when I had legitimate grievances. Financial tensions mounted as Shannon spent freely while criticizing my careful budgeting as stingy. Joint accounts meant I watched helplessly as our savings dwindled on status symbols that seemed to bring her only momentary satisfaction. When I suggested financial counseling, Shannon accused me of trying to control her. After particularly difficult arguments, Shannon would withdraw completely, creating days of icy silence in our home. The pattern became predictable: her criticism, my defense, her escalation, my eventual surrender, and then the cold aftermath. I began walking on eggshells, measuring every word against potential reactions. Physical intimacy became rare and mechanical, with Shannon treating it as another chore to endure rather than a connection to nurture. If I expressed desire, she made me feel childish or inappropriate. If I respected her distance, she questioned my attraction to her. There was no winning. In desperation, I suggested couples therapy. Shannon reluctantly agreed after weeks of resistance. During our sessions, she performed brilliantly acknowledging minor issues while skillfully avoiding the deeper patterns of disrespect. Our therapist, impressed by her articulate self-reflection, often focused on my communication skills instead. Shannon would drive home from these sessions listing all the ways the therapist had validated her perspective. By our 4th anniversary, I was emotionally exhausted and physically depleted. Stress manifested in insomnia, weight loss, and constant anxiety. Friends I had once been close to had drifted away, partly from my unavailability and partly from discomfort around Shannon. My world had shrunk to accommodate her expanding criticism, and I no longer recognized myself in the mirror. Despite everything, I continued trying to please her. The hope that we could return to those early days of connection kept me trapped in cycles of effort and disappointment. I could not see then that no amount of self-sacrifice would ever be enough. The breaking point arrived on an unseasonably warm Saturday in April. Shannon had been insisting we host a dinner party for her colleagues for months. I spent weeks planning the menu, selecting wines, and transforming our backyard into the perfect entertainment space. I took Friday off work to prepare everything, staying up until 2 a.m., marinating meats and chopping vegetables for the elaborate meal. Saturday morning, I was up early, arranging flowers, setting the table with our finest dinnerware, and triple-checking every detail. Shannon emerged from the bedroom at noon, looked around with clinical detachment, and immediately began rearranging my careful preparations. When I offered to help, she shook her head and muttered something about fixing my mistakes. By 6 p.m., guests began arriving. Shannon transformed instantly into the gracious hostess, laughing melodically at their jokes and making everyone feel welcome except me. I served drinks and appetizers while she held court, occasionally sending me meaningful glances when something needed attention. Dinner service was underway when I realized we needed another bottle of wine. As I approached the kitchen, I heard Shannon speaking with her sister Amber and 2 colleagues from her department. I paused just outside the doorway, not intentionally eavesdropping, but suddenly frozen by the sound of my name. "What does Jack think about the Peterson account?" one of her colleagues asked. Shannon laughed, that musical laugh that once melted my heart. "Jack has no idea. I do not discuss important work matters with him. He would just offer some simplistic solution without understanding the dynamics." Her sister chimed in. "Remember when he tried to give you career advice last Christmas?" Everyone in that kitchen erupted with laughter. Then Shannon delivered the blow I can still feel today. "The poor thing tries so hard. This morning he was practically bouncing around the house, asking if everything looked perfect." Her voice took on a mocking quality. "Honestly, I do not know why he bothers. He cannot please anyone, least of all me." The conversation continued as they dissected my failings. My clothing choices were basic. My career lacked ambition. Even our intimate life became fodder for their amusement, with Shannon sharing details that should have remained private between partners. Each revelation was punctuated by their laughter, the sound of it piercing through my chest like physical pain. I do not know how long I stood there, wine bottle clutched in my hand, before Shannon called out, asking where I was with the drinks. I remember walking into that kitchen, with a smile plastered on my face, pouring wine for the very people who had just been laughing at my expense. The physical act of serving them while maintaining composure took every ounce of strength I possessed. Throughout the remainder of that evening, I moved through the motions of hosting like a ghost in my own home. I laughed at appropriate moments, cleared plates, and refilled glasses while internally replaying those devastating words. "He cannot please anyone, least of all me." 5 years of devotion reduced to a cruel joke shared among people who saw me as nothing more than Shannon's disappointing accessory. After the last guest departed around midnight, Shannon kicked off her heels and commented that the evening had gone well despite my overcooked beef tenderloin. I nodded silently and continued cleaning while she headed to bed without offering to help. I sat alone in our darkened living room until dawn, surrounded by the remnants of the party, replaying not just that night but our entire relationship. Every sacrifice, every effort to please her, every moment I had diminished myself to elevate her, crashed down upon me with crushing clarity. The realization that nothing I could ever do would be enough finally sank in not as a theory, but as an undeniable truth. When Shannon emerged the next morning, I was still sitting in the same spot, having not slept. She asked why I looked so pathetic and whether I was going to clean up the remaining mess before her parents arrived for brunch. Something in me finally broke. I told her I had overheard her conversation in the kitchen. Her initial shock quickly transformed into defensive anger. She claimed I was overreacting, that it was just harmless girl talk, that if I were more confident, these things would not bother me. When that approach failed, she switched tactics, crying and asking how I could embarrass her by bringing this up right before her parents arrived. There was no genuine remorse, no recognition of how deeply her words had wounded me. Instead, she turned herself into the victim of my unreasonable sensitivity. It was in that moment I saw with perfect clarity that this pattern would never change unless I changed. The man who had entered this marriage no longer existed. In his place stood someone I barely recognized, someone who had surrendered his dignity piece by piece in a futile attempt to earn love from a person incapable of giving it freely. As Shannon continued her performance of wounded innocence, a calm resolve washed over me. I would never again measure my worth by her impossible standards. I did not yell or make dramatic pronouncements. I simply said, "I will not be here for brunch with your parents. I am going out." She stood frozen in disbelief as I walked past her, grabbed my keys, and left our home for the first time in 5 years without telling her when I would return. That morning drive marked the beginning of my transformation. With no destination in mind, I found myself at a local park where I used to run before marriage consumed my free time. Sitting by the lake, I formulated the plan that would reshape our relationship. First came practical steps. Monday morning, I opened a separate bank account and transferred half of our savings. I consulted discreetly with a financial advisor about untangling our shared investments. I was not preparing for divorce necessarily, but I needed financial independence to break the cycle of control. Next, I reclaimed my physical well-being. I joined a gym and established a routine that prioritized my health. The tension that had lived in my shoulders for years gradually began to dissolve as I reconnected with my body. Within weeks, friends commented on the positive change in my appearance and energy. Most importantly, I established boundaries. When Shannon called demanding to know where I was during my workout sessions, I calmly stated I would talk to her when I got home. When she criticized my clothing, I continued wearing what made me comfortable. When she complained about my cooking, I suggested she prepare her own meals. Shannon cycled through various strategies to regain control. First came rage with accusations of selfishness and threats of divorce. When that failed to provoke me, she switched to tears and vulnerability, claiming my behavior made her feel unloved. Finally, she attempted seduction, briefly becoming the attentive partner I had always wanted. Through each phase, I maintained consistent boundaries and refused to accept blame for her happiness. I stopped apologizing for existing authentically. When Shannon demanded explanations for my change, I simply stated that I was no longer interested in trying to please someone who found me fundamentally disappointing. The most challenging moment came when Shannon involved her family and friends. She organized an intervention of sorts, where her sister Amber parents and 2 close friends confronted me about my selfish new attitude. They took turns expressing concern about how I was treating Shannon, conveniently forgetting their own roles in undermining our marriage. I listened quietly until they finished, then responded with calm clarity. I explained that my commitment to Shannon remained, but my commitment to self-respect had been renewed. I asked if any of them would accept in their own relationships the disrespect I had documented. Their uncomfortable silence spoke volumes. That evening, Shannon and I had our first honest conversation in years. Without accusation or defensiveness, I described what our marriage looked like from my perspective. I explained that I would no longer participate in a relationship where effort flowed only one direction. I outlined what respect looked like to me and asked if she was interested in building something new on a foundation of mutual appreciation. Shannon initially rejected my perspective entirely. She packed a bag and stayed with her sister for 2 weeks, convinced I would revert to my accommodating self in her absence. When I remained firm upon her return, something shifted in her understanding of our new reality. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, Shannon began adjusting her behavior. The constant criticism reduced to occasional slips. She started contributing to household responsibilities without prompting. In social situations, she caught herself before dismissing my opinions. These changes were inconsistent and clearly difficult for her, but they represented genuine effort. Our relationship today bears little resemblance to its former structure. We attend couples therapy with a new counselor who recognizes unhealthy dynamics without assigning blame. Shannon has begun individual therapy to address patterns stemming from her own family history. I continue strengthening my sense of self-worth separate from her approval. Some of her friends have drifted away as our relationship dynamic changed. Her sister Amber still treats me with thinly veiled contempt, but I no longer seek her acceptance. My own support network has expanded as I reconnected with old friends and formed new connections with people who value authenticity over performance. The most profound change has been internal. I no longer mistake self-sacrifice for love. I recognize that genuine connection requires mutual vulnerability and respect, rather than one person continuously diminishing themselves to please another. This understanding has transformed not just my marriage but all my relationships. Shannon and I still have difficult days. Old patterns emerge under stress, requiring conscious recommitment to our new framework. Trust rebuilds slowly, after deep betrayal, and there are moments I question whether we can truly create something sustainable from such a damaged foundation. Yet there are also new moments of genuine connection that would have been impossible before. Shannon recently thanked me for standing firm rather than enabling her worst tendencies. She admitted that she respects me more now than when I was desperately trying to please her. These glimpses of authenticity give me hope that we are building something healthier, regardless of whether our marriage ultimately survives. This journey taught me that sometimes loving someone means establishing boundaries they cannot cross. That respect forms the foundation upon which love can safely grow. That no relationship is worth the complete surrender of your dignity and self-worth. I wonder now how many other relationships follow this pattern, with one partner gradually diminishing themselves in a futile attempt to earn love. If you have experienced something similar, share your story in the comments below. Did you stay and rebuild, or find the strength to walk away? Every experience adds wisdom to our collective understanding of healthy relationships. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe for more real-life experiences. Share this with someone who might need permission to reclaim their self-respect. Sometimes the stories that hurt the most to tell are the ones most needed by others walking similar paths. Thank you for witnessing my journey from people-pleaser to a man who understands his own worth. Remember, true love lifts you higher rather than cutting you down to size. Until next time, take care of your heart first, so you can truly give to others from a place of strength rather than desperation.